So, the Game Awards just wrapped up, and, well, it was interesting to say the least. On top of that, it got me thinking, how do these games get chosen for recognition? In the past few years, when so many great games have been released, what qualifies 5 as the best, and who gets to choose this? Are these choices accurate, and what's truly the best game of the year? I decided to do a little research on this to see what I could find. Because the 2017 gaming year is still wrapping up though, all this data that I found is from the 2016 gaming year. Let's begin. As you can see from this text snippet taken from the Game Awards' 2016 website, aside from fan voting, there are 29 major outlets that decide who gets nominated and chosen as winners. These are those outlets. I could be wrong, but I only counted 28. As far as I'm aware, the voting records aren't released publicly, so the next step was a little tricky. I tried to find the best/end-of-year gaming lists for all 28 outlets that were listed. Of the 28, I couldn't find 7. Ausgamers, Edge Gaming, Funhouse, Level Up, Spiel Tips, The Los Angeles Times, and Multiplayer.it. If you can find them, feel free to send them to me. However, I don't think they'll make much of a difference. You'll see why in a bit. That leaves 21 outlets, which I still feel is a reasonable source of data. However, that brings with it its own set of problems. Each outlet likes to have its own flair or style on listing the best games of the year. Barely any lists had the same ranking system or number of games. How was I going to weigh them all equally? As challenging as the thought of it was, I wasn't going to let it stop me, so I came up with a point system. This point system was going to be out of 10 because most of the lists I found were top 10 ranked lists. This helped in the long run as a starting point. With only 10 items in a list, I was able to assign each their own different value based on how they ranked. 10th place gets 1 point, 9th place gets 2 points, 8th place gets 3 points, and so on, until 1st place, which gets 10 points. This helps when the lists were size 25 or 50. What I did then was distributed along guidelines like this, where numbers that were lower on the list were considered less important and given the same weight, while numbers that were higher on the list were given more exclusive rankings, and 10 was only given to the number 1 spot on every list. However, not all systems were ranked. Some just listed their games blindly, like heathens. So what I did for this, in order to be fair but not over-generous, was add to their score the number of games on the list divided by 2. It seems arbitrary, but basically it compresses any advantage one game has over another in an unranked list, while still giving them extra points for appearing. So if you sat through all that and haven't smashed the dislike button out of boredom yet, you're probably thinking, well, what did the results show? It's this. There are 88 games on here, all of which have at least one vote as one of the best games of 2016. I know the graph looks atrocious, I'm sorry about that. I couldn't figure out how to label a graph with this many elements on it without it looking really bad. If you want to see it in more detail, I'll link the data used in the description below. Now, of course, right away, you see something very important, and it's that the 10 best games rise above all the others, specifically the top 3. Those top 10 games are Overwatch, Doom, Inside, Uncharted 4, Dishonored 2, Titanfall 2, Firewatch, The Witness, Dark Souls 3, and The Last Guardian. Accounting for 10 to 15 points of human error in both directions, the only game that comes even close to beating Overwatch as Game of the Year in 2016 based on critics' reviews is Doom. Now, I don't think this is really a huge surprise. I remember these games being some of the most talked about games of that year when they came out. But remember the original goal, to see how accurately the Game Awards nominees and winners are chosen. So I decided to compare these to the Game of the Year nominees and winners. And the top 5 is basically exactly the same, except for Titanfall, which is 1 point away from number 5, which is pretty close, if not exactly the same. After finishing this up, I thought, well, that was fun, but I have all this information now, I'm sure there's more I can do with it. So I decided to compare them to review aggregators like Metacritic and GameRankings to see how they add up. I thought comparing the data would be easy, but there are actually a lot of flaws with Metacritic's scoring system in my opinion. First, there are multiple different scores for the same game as long as they're on a different platform. So Overwatch, for example, shows up 3 different times on the top 10. On top of that, you only need 4 reviews for a Metacritic average, So Out of the Park Baseball 17, which only has 8 reviews, has a higher score than Dark Souls 3, which has 69 reviews. I'm sure Out of the Park Baseball 17 is a great game, but it's not fair to hold it up to the same scrutiny that other games with more reviews have. I solved this problem easily by using a different website, GameRankings, which lets you filter games by number of reviews. This is the top 10 list of games based on at least 20 reviews. There's still doubles though, so I guess that's a normal thing to do on game review websites. On top of that though, there was something else fishy with the Metacritic website. Out of the Park Baseball has a Metascore of 92, but a user score of 3.4. What? How could there be such a big discrepancy? So I decided to make this my next matter to look into, and well... It was shocking! In fact, when the top 10 list is sorted by Metacritic user score, the list is almost unrecognizable in terms of original order. This got me thinking, what else do the users think? Well, it turns out user opinion of Metacritic is, I'll just say, divided. Many accused the Metacritic user review system as being plagued by trolls and fanboys, rating a game with absurdly low or high scores it does not deserve, simply based on their opinion of the game, even if they had not played it. It was at this point that I reached an impasse. I was really banking on Metacritic's aggregation of user reviews. I was trying to make people's opinions quantifiable data, but is that possible? Is it a realistic goal to try to turn a subjective belief into an objective truth? Does the fact that more people voted for Uncharted 4 in this Metacritic user poll make it a better game than all the others? What about the people who only played Uncharted 4 and not all the other games? Uncharted 4 has sold over 9 million copies, while Doom has only sold around 2 million copies. Surely 7 million more copies accounts for at least 1,500 more voters. Or what about the fact that Overwatch had already gotten extremely popular before release with an open beta of over 7 million players, giving them the advantage of an already huge player base going in? There's too many variables, too many loopholes, too many spaces for human error. So how do we know? How do we know who deserved to win the Game Awards? How do we know if they were right? How can we determine what the best game of the year is, or the best game of all time for that matter? I guess you'll just have to play them all for yourself.